Hello to everyone, and welcome, and thank you for logging in for the webinar today. My name is TJ Cantwell, and I'm the Executive Director at the NCCCO Foundation. At the NCCCO Foundation, we are working to improve the crane industry for everyone working in the load handling field by enhancing safety through research, education, and workforce development programs. You can learn more about our foundation programs, safety tools, research reports, and future webinars at ncccofoundation.org. Today's webinar is What's the Difference? Certification versus certificate versus qualification versus competence, ensuring you're in compliance. During our webinar, our speaker will discuss with the OSHA and ASME requirements for those working in the crane industry to help you understand if you are truly in compliance. I'll be acting as the moderator. We will conduct a Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. So if you have any questions during the webinar, please type them in the Q&A box in Zoom as we go, and we'll address as many as possible during the Q&A session at the end. Please note that today's webinar is being recorded so that we can share it with others. Before we start, I want to provide a brief introduction to our great speaker today, Tom Siegelsteele. Tom is the CEO of the National Commission for the Certification of Crane Operators, better known as CCO. He is also the vice chairman on ASME B30, a voting member of ASME B30.29, and an alternate on ASME B30.5. He is one of the members of representing the USA on ISO TAG, as well as the International Crane Stakeholder Assembly. Mr. Siegelsteele also serves as a subject matter expert for the NCCCO Foundation's Crane Type Advisory Group. And prior to joining NCCCO, Mr. Siegelsteele served as general manager for Levitt Cranes USA, branch manager for Barnhart Crane and Rigging, as well as president of Siegelsteele Cranes, Inc. Welcome, and on behalf of myself and our audience, I want to say thank you to Mr. Siegelsteele for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. Now, enough from me. Let me turn it over to you and let you provide your presentation. Let me give you control here. There you go.
Thank you, TJ. Are we sharing there we go. Perfect. So, and the screen can be seen by everybody, I hope. So,
It should be able to be seen. Yep.
okay. Well, thank you, everyone. That was me quite a few years ago, I guess. So the gray hair comes over time, and we appreciate that. So, TJ, let me just do this. Okay. Having, oh, there we go. And now it's jumping. Okay. So let's excited to be able to speak today about this topic. It's one in the industry that is near and dear to our heart. But largely there's a lot of confusion about it. We hear things like CCO license and we hear about certification and qualification and really what do these things mean? How do they work? So we want to today, the objective is to really get the differences down between what those things mean and then really work through, as TJ indicated, the documentation required on a job site. In order to do that, we need to look at different rules and regulations and standards. And beyond the rules, regulations, and standards, there's also site supervision or insurance companies or different things that might drive some more specifics areas and that sort of thing. In today's conversation, we're going to keep it at the national level, which is kind of OSHA and industry standards, but recognizing that there are other requirements that are more stringent. Specifically, a lot of times in the comprehensive plan states, otherwise known as state plan states, they can create rules that are more stringent than OSHA, and so often they do. Sometimes OSHA updates there's been updates in the 2000s, so that's good. But prior to that, in the crane world, the updates were in the 1960s, and so from an OSHA level. So the states move ahead in some cases, particularly if there's an incident or an accident that is noteworthy. they typically can move ahead. And so the yellow states that are listed are Fed OSHA, so they typically do not move ahead on those type of things unless there's a legislative element that's required or done. So some of the states and some of the areas are more restrictive, just in even what the definition of construction is. We had one state say that vacuuming a carpet is qualifies as construction because it's a maintenance activity. And so you have to be really careful with how each state defines construction, as well as cranes. Some have limitations of 6,000 pounds. Some have 2,000 pound capacity. Some have less than that. And so it's important to understand which state, where the states that you're working in, and how they define a crane and how they qualify then the individuals as well. I would note that the two or three most recent areas of change really have come about in rigger qualifications, signal person qualifications, and AD director qualifications. And those are areas that are, in some cases, under development, and in some cases have already been modified or changed since the crane rule came out from OSHA. On the other side from OSHA, the regulatory side, and a lot of times, somebody might say, well, you get a ticket from speeding. That's kind of the OSHA side, that's the regulatory side. But really, the industry standards are where you can get sued and where your defenses come from. And what's true about ASME, they are industry safety standards for the crane industry. And what's great about ASME is that they are updated on a routine basis. Some standards are updated every 3 years, like mobile and tower, where other standards are updated every 5 years. And what's even more great about the ASME side is that they can respond to questions. And so if there's a lack of clarity or it doesn't quite fit your situation, you can ask about those sort of things to the committee, and they can respond to you. Typically, ASME doesn't get confined into construction or general industry or power lines. They have a much broader scope. Many of the standards, including the mobile standard, has just been recently updated. And you can see here, this is an ongoing thing. Because they have frequent updates, the standards, you have to stay up with them. And so it's really important that your organization has copies of the most recent standards. If anything's more than 5 years old, it's likely out of date. You can see at the bottom there are some that have been restated and that sort of thing. And so sometimes that does happen, but very often, as you can see, all the ones above it, there's a new standard that comes out. In order for a new standard to be created, there has to be material change. So there's at least some significant changes in there that one would have to become familiarized with. So what is great about the ASME jurisdiction is it applies in all places in all cases. OSHA gets to ASME by citing under the general clauses, general standards, safety clauses, and that's how they kind of get to ASME. But so it doesn't have to be specifically stated in OSHA for them to get there. But ASME is broadly based, and again, it's not driven by construction versus general industry or those sort of things. So, and I would just say just one comment about ASME is there was a point where OSHA jumped ahead of ASME on some things, and I think ASME is catching up on most everything, and so you'll see that as the years go on. And then as we go from this point forward, you'll see ASME continue to get more and more defined and more they'll become the lead on that until OSHA updates again. So, okay, so as far as requirement levels, within the regulations and standards, there's really three different levels. There's a competent, ASME would call that designated and competent. We'll define each of these. And then there's a qualified level, and then there's a certified level. Sometimes the qualified and certified flip around a little bit. And sometimes but the levels that you have to go through and what you have to meet and what you have to understand are defined in these different areas. So let's go through each of these. So competent, the key on competent is that they have authorization to take prompt corrective measures. So they're the ones that would see a hazard and saying it's dangerous, and they have the authorization to take prompt corrective measures. So the authorization is key there. So a lot of times we get into it's not necessarily skill level, it's more assignment, and it's delegated. It's who's the authority, who has the right to take that. So sometimes you get into a situation where, who's a competent person. There's a crew out there. Who's the lead on the crew? Who's the person that's the foreman or the superintendent, that kind of thing, that has that ability to take those steps. So competent is really playing in that space. Qualified is someone who has successfully demonstrated the ability to solve or resolve the subject matter, the work, or the project. Now, you can do that through extensive knowledge and training, but generally that means that someone has taken a test, demonstrated those skills in some sort of way. Qualification always comes down to how do you know that person was qualified? If someone is in an accident and they are trying to defend that they are qualified only through extensive knowledge, or experience, it's like, well, were they experienced in that area? And just the mere fact they have the accident is a negative for that. So generally, we see whenever it's qualified, there is some form of a test or some form of a uh, assessment that says this person is qualified. I will also add in on this that qualified needs to be something that the employer is the final determination is made by the employer. They make the final determination. They can utilize other sources and things to get to the point of qualified, but the employer really this rests with the employer as a final part. So, certified means a person who has met the testing requirements by a nationally recognized third party assessor. And so, nationally recognized in the US means that you're accredited to ISO 17024. So, 17024, so ISO is International Standards Organization. 17024 is specific to certification of personnel. And it's not just personnel in construction or cranes, it's certification of any and all personnel. And so what's important about that is there's a detailed process that really we have to go through in order to make sure that certification is met, the criteria for certification is met. So, what is certification? So, it's a process. And I'm going to say some things here that some of you may start struggling with, but certification is not for government entities. It's not for government entities. Government entities cannot certify individuals. Government entities can license individuals and they can use certification bodies to obtain licenses, but they cannot certify. And why is that? Because there is a process here that I'll outline a little bit. So, non-governmental entity grants a time limited, that's important, recognition after they've met the criteria, and the criteria is built through what's called a job task analysis. And the job task analysis is what do I need to know? What skills do I need to have? what do I need to demonstrate in order to show that I'm competent for this area? And those are psychometrically evaluated and developed, and then they're defended that way. So usually there's a process that you go through, and then you have to re-meet that process to some extent to re-qualify because again, it's time limited. There was an article that went out by one of the safety industries saying that recertification isn't needed. And that's true if it's a certificate. That's true if it's something else. But under certification, we have to verify that that person has continual capability to meet those thresholds. And we have to do that routinely, at maximum once every 5 years. Okay, so again, the concepts of certification is to say that they've met the required competencies in terms of knowledge, skills, and attributes, and it is a third-party assessment. Certification, there's all kinds of restrictions related to can you do training? The answer is no. Can you be the employer? The answer is no. Can you have any other engagements with that individual, relationships with that individual? The answer is no. It's all a third party, separated kind of thing. And so the importance of that is really highlighted in certification, and especially the accredited certification. So on the certification programs themselves, the focus is on evaluation. And so we get a lot of people that call in and say, hey, can you just tell me what I missed on the exam? Well, we're not training. We're in training world, you would take someone and you would say, this is what you missed, and this is how we can help you. This is what you need to improve on. That's not a certification program. So a certification program is we measure, we evaluate, we see if you meet the bar or not, and it's a yes or no. And so that's why in many of the CCO things or other stuff, you'll just see a pass or fail kind of thing. Now, we can do that through written, oral, or practical, observational kind of things. Some exams, some certifications require practical, so there's an observational element. Some of them have oral, some of them have written as well. All of our programs have written. So I thought it would be important to highlight the ISO key elements here, just to highlight what it means to be actually a certification body. So as we've indicated, the job task analysis happens at the beginning. We are concerned about fair, reliable, and valid exams. People who have answers to the exam concern us. Exposure to the exam is something that concerns us. That's another area, like in a government side, Freedom of Information Act gives access to things where certification bodies aren't under that constraint. Conflict of interest is a big deal, as I indicated earlier. If you have a conflict, any conflict of interest has to be excluded. We do psychometric evaluations, and we are audited routinely. We have 2 audits a year. One is through the assessor body, the auditing company, which is ANAB for us. The other is an internal audit that we have to submit. It's a third party, but we still have to submit that to ANAB for evaluation. And we get looked at. Usually about 3,000 to 5,000 pages of documents go in, and we have to show compliance with the ISO 17024 standard. So the big item at the very bottom is if you have different modalities. So let's say you have different test formats. Let's say you have a computer one and you have a online proctored one. Exams, we have to demonstrate that there's no material discrepancy. Scores aren't different between the two things, and that's also true for Spanish versus English or any of those language concerns. Okay, so let's move on from certification. That's the 30,000 foot view of certification. And you may be wondering, okay, well, why are you talking about that and that sort of thing? And it's because in some of the space, again, we get confused between what's certification and what's a certificate, maybe, or that sort of thing. So a certificate is something that's different than certification. It's really more of an educational training program that gives you a certificate at the end that says you've attended it, you've met some of the stuff. Sometimes there's an evaluation of you at the end of it, but this would be like going to some class, watching some video, going to through some training, those sort of things. And at the end, you get a certificate that says, "Hey, I achieved this. I completed this process," and that sort of thing. So very much like a high school graduation certificate or a higher education certificate. Once you've completed the process, you've completed it. Unless you do something totally wacky, it can't be removed, and that sort of thing. But generally, it means that you've achieved a certain level of training and that sort of thing. It does not mean that you've maintained that level of skill, or that I'm an older guy, so when I went to college, I was in a bunch of math classes. Am I a math genius now? Not as much as I was back then, right? So I've lost some of the skills and some of the abilities that I had back then because I was trained and everything. So that's a great example of where a certificate is at that time, at that place, at that thing. This is what they went through. Um, Typically, this is offered by employers or training companies. If it's offered by a training company, you need to understand what it is, and that sort of thing. And we'll talk more about some of the things around that. So let's just compare the difference between certificate versus certification. So, and just to walk through this a little bit, and I'll highlight maybe a couple of things. So, number one is certification is really awarded by a third party not involved in training, where certificates they're typically involved in your training process or educational program. So that's a good indicator. Is the trainer also providing the documentation? And if the answer is yes, then typically that's a certificate. So what does a certificate means? It means that they completed the course. It does not mean mastery of certain things. There are no ongoing requirements out there, whereas certification does have ongoing requirements. And the last one I'll highlight, I think it's really important, is portability. Certification is portable from place to place because you've demonstrated skills and you're the certificate holder, whereas a certificate is not portable. So if the employer paid you to go to a training class for rigging, that rigging certificate does not go to your next employer. Your next employer cannot rely on that. And so that's an important distinction. There are many organizations when we do audits or when we look at stuff that they'll take other employers' certificates as evidence of their new employee meeting requirements, and that simply just is incorrect. And so that's a really important distinction between certificate and certification. So let's talk about the last one in the group here, and that's licenses. Licenses are typically, licenses are issued by government. And so it can be state, local, federal. It's time limited, and it's that they've met a certain criteria. So it's typically mandatory in order to operate or do things in the area of licensure. So there are certain states that require operator certification. And because of that, that's part of their licensure structure, and that sort of thing. So licensing can use, again, certification programs as a test platform or as a criteria. There are multiple states that do that. We have crane inspectors. I'll use Washington State as an example. Crane inspectors are required to have a certificate from CCO on crane inspecting, and then that's part of their license review and part of the criteria that they have to meet the licensing element. Usually there's a fee kind of paid to the government for the licensure structure. And the reason that governments like it is because they can revoke licensing as well on whenever they want for their reasons that they may have. And so some like to have that as a control point. Some like to have it as a revenue point. Some like to have it as just a review to make sure that certain criteria is being met. So again, let's compare licensing to certification. So the difference is certification awarded by third party, um, where a license is awarded by a governmental agency. The license indicates compliance with legal requirements. It doesn't have anything to do with mastery or demonstration of required competencies. Typically, both have ongoing requirements, and the license is owned by the governmental agency and can be taken away. Certification is owned by the certification body and can be taken away. So that's kind of the differences between license and certification. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how these all comply with the levels of competent, qualified, and certified. And really, I've tried to just make this graphical representation to demonstrate that licensed is unique. It's off to the side. It doesn't mean if you're licensed, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're certified, qualified, or competent. It meant that it just means that you met the requirements of the licensure. So that's all that it means. It's whether the licensure meets those other requirements is something that would have to be reviewed and looked at. A certificate typically meets the qualified standard and that sort of thing, but it does not meet certified. Certified typically meets both the qualified and the certified levels. So that's how they function. So let's talk about specifically some issues that are going on in the qualification space. These are the two that we have kind of, can you get a certificate? Can you get certified? That sort of thing. And so just things to be aware of related to this. So number one is portability. So certification is portable. Certificates are not portable, and there's a star by it. There are some exceptions related to training trusts. So for unionized companies, many of them pay into an employer training trust for training. And if they get a certificate from that training trust, it's good for all employers who are part of that training trust. So that's the only exception on certificate. But if you leave that union or local and you go work in a different area, that document does not flow with you. So again, portability is really important thing to check on the certificate. On certification, it is what it is. It's kind of like a driver's license. It meets the standard. It goes from site to site. It's what it is. But certificates, you have to really look into, are you a member of that local training trust, to accept it? Otherwise, you can't accept any of those certificates coming through, which often means that you wind up having to retrain everybody into your own programs and for your own purposes for those sort of things. The next one is defensibility, and we've seen this more and more in cases. And so I just wanted to highlight this for everyone. Certification is really, is it applicable or not? Is it valid or not? And then are there additional employer requirements? Because because we fall under the ISO 17024, we don't get into the whole concepts of, hey, do I need to validate the exam? Do I need to do any of that? Because that is part of the requirement of our accreditation. So all of the, is your exam up to date? Is it reflecting the right standards? Did it mean the right things? Are they really qualified at the end or already addressed? And so we don't get questions about that. And we don't expose exam items and those sort of things. Have seen cases where certificates are different because it's a training provider and it's a training certificate. They do go into, does it comply with the regulation? Is it out of date? What are the course instructor's qualifications? So they start getting the training instructor. They want to know some of the course content. So like if there was a power line accident, did they miss questions on the power lines? Did they not know that? Did you retrain them? Did you go over those items at the end of the thing on the areas that they missed? And did you review it with them and help educate them and train them? Again, certificates are really about training and knowledge related to the training at that point in time. And so investigators on state and federal levels have been diving into when there's a certificate, is it the right thing? Did you cover the right stuff? Did you actually train your employee appropriately? So again, certification doesn't have those challenges because it is a requirement to meet that criteria, whereas certificates can have that exposure. The last area, and I don't know really what to call it, so I called it pseudo certifications. If that offends anyone, I'm sorry. I don't know of another way to really phrase it, but it's certifications or certificates that are trying to act like a certification. And so how those are getting structured is it's really an educational process, course content designed by trainers. So that's certificate, right? They do have completion of course exams and they may review the exams. Okay, that's a little bit in between, but then they provide a card that says the individual is qualified and they have an expiration date. And at that point, they've crossed over into pretending to be a certification when they don't meet the standards of the certification. So the standards of the certification have things like the trainer can't be involved in that. They have things like, psychometrics. They have a job task analysis. It's how did the stuff get built, and all those sort of things. And they're under review and assessment by ANAB. And so these pseudo certifications are out there. We've seen them, and we would just strongly encourage that that's something that gets avoided because I think it creates a lack of clarity. There are a number of individuals who um, have tried to pass off some of these kind of certifications or certificates as a certification, and they wound up with huge fines on the OSHA level for not having appropriate certification. So make sure you know what's required where and that sort of thing. So just beware and review those. I would also say if someone indicates that the individual's qualified, that they're and they don't have a job task analysis, that's a problem. That's a problem for defense. Okay, so let's apply everything that we've just kind of gone through to the crane world. And so I'm a graphical learner kind of thing. And so on the left side, these are all the different roles and responsibilities that are currently defined on the job site for cranes. And these are, again, one person can work in multiple roles. So this isn't saying that there is 8 people on a job site, but generally, these are the roles that people are looking to see filled or people are acting within. So the reason the ones on the left are in white is because you don't have to have any skill, knowledge, or ability. So maybe some would argue that. I might argue that actually. So to be a crane owner, crane user, or controlling entity, those are assigned by virtue of contractual relationship, or they're assigned by your position, your organization's position. So These are things that there's no requirement for any of those. I know there's many an operator that would love the crane owner to have some skill and knowledge, but that's not a requirement under the current standards. However, on the right hand side, all of these roles do have requirements, and so I think it's really important to walk through these and make sure we understand what they are. And I would also say this, on every single job site, these roles exist, with probably the exception of assembly disassembly director. That only exists when the cranes meet the criteria to require that. But the other four positions above it are on every single job site. So it's not, well, we didn't have a lift director today. It's who was working in that role, and that sort of thing. So let's just talk a little bit about what's required. And again, ASME's working through some stuff related to assembly disassembly director. So I'm going to start on the bottom. Right now, that only exists in OSHA and only under the 1926 standard. Under OSHA, assembly disassembly director is a qualified and a competent person, or it's a competent person assisted by a qualified person. So, what does that mean? So, it needs to be that's the person running the crew for assembly disassembly is the competent person. The qualified person could be a service technician. It could be in some situations you have just, there's a operator and an oiler out there assembling the crane, and that's what it is. And so the operator is working as both the qualified and competent. Sometimes a service tech is sent in, sometimes a manufacturer tech is sent in. Sometimes a geotech person is sent in for ground conditions. Sometimes other people are sent in. So those all fill in that role of qualified. The competent person is the one running the crew. And so I think that's really important. ASME, again, is working on language for that. I don't know when it'll be out, but they're working on that language. Currently is non-existent in the 2025 standard. Lift director, I'm going to skip up to lift director. Lift directors are on every single job and they're qualified. Lift directors are appointed by the contractor, the site supervisor. And so this ties directly back to general contractors in many circumstances. This ties back to who's running the job, and the lift directors implement the work, and they stop the work if something's unsafe. Everyone can stop it, but the lift director is the one that says, okay, we're going to go ahead and go forward, and that sort of thing. Under OSHA, it just says qualified, and there's not much more to it than that. Under ASME, the 2025 standard, it says that they are qualified and they pass a written exam. And it has the content area that they need to know within that standard. The crane operator under 1926, so that's the construction standard in the U.S., they're required to be certified. And so in general industry, they're not required to be certified. In other industries, they're not. I would just caution though, um, there's a so if let me give you one example. If I'm sitting at a refinery and I'm lifting a piece of pipe for somebody, and that piece of pipe is a like kind exchange, then I'm performing in most cases, general industry work. I'm performing maintenance. But if that pipe is bigger or stronger or different, then I'm now altering the construction activity. Well, I'm altering the unit, and so that becomes a construction activity. And so you have to be very careful. You can be in one spot lifting one load, and just, because it has 5 bolts instead of 4 bolts, it can switch over to construction. So I would recommend for anyone there are definitely situations that are general industry or manufacturing all the time, and that's all they are. For those that are working in industries where the definition can be moved around or manipulated that way, strongly recommend you go to the most stringent and comply with the most stringent. so that way you don't have to double check or get caught when something changes and puts you in the category that you're not prepared for. Under ASME, crane operator has to pass a written and practical exam. And so those are defined within ASME as well. OSHA does a good job of defining what the tests are about. ASME elaborates on that. Signal person under OSHA is just qualified. There's not really exam content, but ASME has added that written and practical exams, what those need to cover, those sort of things. And I would just add on the signal person, it needs to include what the individual, what type of signals that they're capable of doing on their qualifications. So, can they do radio signal or are they just standard signals? On the rigger, qualified under OSHA, qualified written and practical under ASME. And again, we need to note what rigging that they are qualified in. So is it just mechanical devices? Is it chain? Is it web sling? Is it wire rope? And those things should be denoted so you know what the capabilities are on the card. CCO just we don't stick it specifically on the card. It's on the QR code. When you go to the Verify CCO site, it does disclose what our tests cover on those in case there's any questions about that. And so I think that TJ kind of summarizes what we need to have in the industry as far as the different things and the different levels of certificate versus license versus certification.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Tom. I appreciate the comprehensive overview. So we have an opportunity for Q&A for folks. If you've got a question for Tom related to anything he talked about, please feel free to submit it in the Q&A box in Zoom, and we'll take your questions as we can here. We got a few minutes. So one first question here, Tom, is you were talking about the kind of the state by state breakdown of what the restrictions are. Do you know if is there a place that somebody could find the differences between state requirements and the breakdown of those restrictions?
Yeah, I think CCO is working to build something like that. We used to have a state page. I would, I'm not aware of a tool right now that specifically identifies those. I would say that um, look at the definition of construction, look at the definition of crane, and look at the definition of qualification for operators and things. I would say within that, the plan states that are typically the most active and different. You can have Pennsylvania, you can have New York City, 1000% is different. And then you can have Washington State is different and California is different. And those are the primary ones. I know Florida has some stuff related to hurricanes that they're talking about, but that has not been implemented yet. That's still kind of in discussion stages. So, and we can do probably a better job of doing alerts when states kind of do have things pop up. We'd be happy to kind of provide that information.
All right, great. I don't know. Glad to see you guys are working on that. Another question was you mentioned, I think, the dangers of a certificate versus certification versus the pseudo certification. So anything else besides, I guess you mentioned date can be the thing that can make it a pseudo certification. Anything else that people can watch out for or ways to make sure they got the right thing?
Yeah, I think it's TJ, that's a great question. What I would say is really it's the qualification element. And so when you get a training certificate, you send someone off to a school and they go through training stuff, and they get trained. That training outfit can verify that they're trained. They can't verify that they're qualified because they don't typically have a job task analysis that they're comparing it against. So for them, if it says the word qualified on there. That's just a misstatement. And it's not accurate. Um, unless they have a JTA and unless they're accredited, and they can go through that and do all that sort of thing. Um, I think it's important. I think it's important to be able to. The date is an indicator, but the qualification word is a bigger one.
Okay, good to know. Another question that came in here, I'll make sure I can read it right. They're basically wondering if there's a link to a link to a customer from your website. If they ask when they ask if they need a crane certification or if qualification works. Is there a way to determine, an easy way to determine that?
Yeah, we can. I think that would be an area. We have a new website coming out in October, and so that would be something that we could highlight about do they need what do they need for that state or that sort of thing. We could make a map and they could click on it. I think that's a great idea. So thank you
Okay.
to that person. Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, good ideas. Another one, and again, to the best of your knowledge, I think is all these questions are, which is, they're asking, they've got a question here: is it true or false? Crane operators that have a license and not a certification, Connecticut, they note, have met the criteria of a certification. Thus, if a contractor we work for asks for a certification and the operator provides a license, they are good. So it sounds like it's really a license question versus certification question, particularly in Connecticut.
Yeah, so my understanding, unless I'm wrong, is that in Connecticut, they have an underlying requirement to have like a CCO or some type of certification in order to achieve the license. And so under that case, that's just similar to Washington State's crane inspector. If that's the underlying thing, then that's approved. To the extent I know New York has a operator licensing program, for example, and they call it certification, New York State, and you know that's that does not necessarily mean certification. It's more of a license. So
Gotcha. Thank you.
so I would say this just to say it's true that they have a license, but normally the license I think in Connecticut is based off of a certification. So it's like an underlying thing.
Okay. And then for certification, yeah, the CCO only does offers certification, right? There's no lower level of that CCO is offering in terms of what you all are providing, correct?
Correct.
Gotcha. And if so, somebody was saying that they were certified by CCO, what's the easiest way to make sure that's the case?
We have a Verify CCO place that they can go to verify certification, and that's the easiest place just to verify it.
Gotcha. Um, Another question: what entity is responsible for ensuring operators or contractor companies are complying with certification processes and not just certificates? Can ASME bring more light on the responsibilities if not complying with standards or regulations?
Yeah, so all the certifications and all that stuff roll up to the site supervisor, and that's where it resides. And so the site supervisor has to drive those elements. So um, you can require that in contracts. You can drive that down to the crane supplying company, the crane user, those sort of things. And the lift director should be verifying those things as well as part of the job site routine.
Gotcha. And if there is, I'm sure you've seen it. If there's a problem with that kind of that's not being done, or somebody's not designated as a lift director.
Yeah, so there's two parts. So one is the common phrase is that, oh, the crane operator is the expert. They may know a lot about the crane, but they're not responsible for the documentation side. So it's really the entity that's responsible is the site supervisor, because when OSHA or enforcement come, that's the place they go to lock down the site or doing that sort of thing. So,
Okay. And then just a question here, clarifying something you said. Are you saying that a training provider cannot provide third-party qualifications with an expiration date?
I'm saying that if they do, and it's not based on a job task analysis, and it's not based on the ISO 17024 standard, that they are creating a pseudo certification and it's not appropriate.
Okay. Um, are there plans or standards on having licenses or certified on the size of crane or type of crane?
Type of crane is where everything's certification is gone. The one entity that used to do it based on size has converted all of their stuff back to type. So all of the certification bodies in the US are aligned by type. And the reason is because then we can also align to the ASME standard related to types and certifications. One of the discussions has been in California, and one of the certification bodies had two types of certification. One had 13, one had five. And so one of the requirements was, how do we align certification bodies? And the answer is by type. And so you'll see that as we go forward in the future, it'll continue to do that. I will also say size of crane can be manipulated. And so if we say 40-ton crane or a 50,000 pound crane or those sort of things, we've seen that manipulated in the past. So we've tried to stay away from that and just go by type.
All right. And another clarifying question here. Based on the responsibilities versus requirements slide you had, the person on the job site that needs CCO certification is the crane operator, correct? All other persons could be quote unquote qualified with non-CCCO training with documented written and practical testing, right?
Yep, that's correct. Yeah, it's not here to say everyone needs certification. I think there's some advantages of certification and that there's portability. That's maybe not an advantage for an employer, but there's also defensibility and some other things. But yeah, no, we're not saying at all that the other roles have to be certified through CCO certification.
And you mentioned again the kind of the differences if someone believes they might have a certification and they don't have it or they're not qualified. Um, if you when you've seen if you've seen situations like that, I mean, what are the consequences of all that you've kind of talked about here? Is it that how what really happens if something if somebody is not meeting the requirements and is found out to be not meeting them?
Yeah, so there's been multiple OSHA cases where someone got a qualification card and went out and tried to operate a crane, for example, in a construction scenario, and they've received huge fines. I mean, it's the fines keep going up and up on things, and they then had their site shut down. They lost some of their contract capability because they'd represented to the general that they were meeting the standards and they weren't. And so, I mean, that's a pretty rough day when you go through all of that. Luckily, in the two situations I'm aware of, neither one had an accident as the cause. It was a site audit over another issue, and they were digging through the paperwork and found it. But if you have a fatality or you have something else that's piled on top of that, then your whole organization's on the line. I mean, I've seen, 500 million, $1 billion companies not make it through those.
Wow. Okay, I think those are the main questions here. I think those one asking about if this webinar recording will be available. I can answer that one. Yes, we will be sharing the webinar recording within the next couple of days. Put it on social media, and I will be sending it out to everybody who's registered for this webinar. So I appreciate everybody. Oh, we've got one more. Um, what entity defines construction?
So that would be so if it's a planned state, the state would define construction. If it's a Fed OSHA state, then Fed OSHA has defined that. And so that would be the 1926 standard. It defines what construction activities are and that kind of thing. Otherwise, it's each of the plan states would have their own definition of construction. And the word to be really careful of in the construction words are maintenance. If it includes the word maintenance, that's a really slippery slope. So.
Okay, good to know. Well, so before we sign off, I just want to thank everyone for attending. Please keep an eye out for our future webinars. We have ones on workforce development, safety. In August, we're going to be having a webinar on our our latest safety research on the impact of certification and training on safety. In September, we will have one focused on the state of rigging and signaling in the industry. And in October, we will also have one on assembly and disassembly safety. If you want to watch any of our previous webinars or see the recording of this one, it will be available in a few days at ncccofoundation.org. We will be sending out a brief survey after this. So if you attended, please take a few minutes to fill that out. We'd love to have your feedback on ways we can improve and other things we could be doing webinars on. So with that said, I want to thank you again, Tom, for joining us and sharing your information, and everybody for joining the NCCCO Foundation's webinar. We appreciate your time and look forward to seeing you the next time. Have a great day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.